Tana God, hello all. Oshasahia, good evening. Wado, thank you for watching. So this is day 5, part B of reading Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, an Inquiry into Values by Robert M. Pirsig. His way of looking at things produces a kind of description that can be called an quote-unquote analytic description. That is another name of the classic platform from which one discusses things in terms of their underlying form. He was a totally classic person, and to give a fuller description of what this is, I want now to turn his analytic approach back upon itself, to analyze analysis itself. I want to do this first of all by giving an extensive example of it, and then by dissecting what it is. The motorcycle is a perfect subject for it, since the motorcycle itself was invented by classic minds, so listen. A motorcycle may be divided for purposes of classical rational analysis by means of its competent assemblies and by means of its functions. If divided by means of its competent assemblies, its most basic division is into a power assembly and a running assembly. The power assembly may be divided into the engine and the power delivery system. The engines will be taken up first. The engine consists of a housing containing a powertrain, a fuel-air system, an ignition system, a feedback system, and a lubrication system. The powertrain consists of cylinders, pistons, connecting rods, a crankshaft, and a flywheel. The fuel-air system components, which are part of the engine, consist of a gas tank and filter, an air cleaner, a carburetor, valves, and exhaust pipes. The ignition system consists of an alternator, a rectifier, a battery, a high voltage coil, and spark plugs. The feedback system consists of a cam chain, a camshaft, tappets, and a distributor. The lubrication system consists of an oil pump and channels throughout that housing for distribution of the oil. The power delivery system accompanying the engine consists of a clutch, a transmission, and a chain. The supporting assembly accompanying the power assembly consists of a frame, including foot pegs, seat and fenders, a steering assembly, front and rear shock absorbers, wheels, control levers and cables, lights and horn, and speed and mileage indicators. That's a motorcycle divided according to its components. To know what the components are for, a division according to functions is necessary. A motorcycle may be divided into normal running functions and special operator-controlled functions. Normal running functions may be divided into functions during the intake cycle, functions during the compression cycle, functions during the power cycle, and functions during the exhaust cycle, and so on. I could go on about which functions occur in their proper sequence during each of the 4 cycles, then go on to the operator-controlled functions, and what would be a very summary description of the underlying form of a motorcycle. It would be extremely short and rudimentary as descriptions of this sort go. Almost any one of the components mentioned can be expanded on indefinitely. I've read an entire engineering volume on contact points alone, which are just a small but vital part of the distributor. There are other types of engines than the single-cylinder Otto engine described here. 2-cycle engines, multiple cylinder engines, diesel engines, Wankel engines, W-A-N-K-E-L, but this example is enough. This description could cover the quote-unquote what of the motorcycle in terms of components and the quote-unquote how of the engine in terms of functions. It would badly need a quote-unquote where analysis in the form of an illustration, and also a quote-unquote why analysis in the form of engineering principles that led to this particular conformation of parts. But the purpose here isn't exhaustively to analyze the motorcycle. It's to provide a starting point, an example of a mode of understanding of these things, which will itself become an object of analysis. There's certainly nothing strange about this description at first hearing. It sounds like something from a beginning textbook on the subject, or perhaps a first lesson in a vocational course. What is unusual about it is seen when it ceases to be a mode of discourse and becomes an object of discourse. Then certain things can be pointed to. The first thing to be observed about this description is so obvious you have to hold it down or it will drown out every other observation. This is It is just duller than ditch water. That's funny. Yada, 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 yada. Carburetor, gear ratio, compression, yada, yada. Piston plugs, intake, yada, yada. On and on and on. That is the romantic face of the classic mode. Dull, awkward, and ugly. Few romantics get beyond that point. But if you can hold down that most obvious observation, some other things can be noticed that do not at first appear. The first is that the motorcycle so described is almost impossible to understand unless you already know how one works. The immediate surface impressions that are essential for primary understanding are gone. Only the underlying form is left. The second is that the observer is missing. The description doesn't say that to see the piston you must remove the cylinder head. Quote unquote you aren't anywhere in the picture. Even the quote unquote operator is a kind of personality-less robot whose performance of a function on the machine is completely mechanical. There are no real subjects in this description. Only objects exist that are independent of any observer. The third is that the words quote unquote good and quote unquote bad and all their synonyms are completely absent. No value judgments have been expressed anywhere, only facts. The fourth is that there is a knife moving here, a very deadly one, an intellectual scalpel, so swift and so sharp you sometimes don't see it moving. You get the illusion that all those parts are just there and are being named as they exist, but they can be named quite differently and organized quite differently depending on how the knife moves. For example, the feedback mechanism, which includes the camshaft and cam chain and tappets and distributor, exists only because of an unusual cut of this analytic knife. If you were to go to a motorcycle parts department and ask them for feedback assembly, they wouldn't know what the heck HE double hockey sticks you were talking about. They don't split it up that way. No two manufacturers ever split it up quite the same way, and every mechanic is familiar with the problem of the part you can't buy because you can't find it because the manufacturer considers it a part of something else. It is important to see this knife for what it is and not to be fooled into thinking that motorcycles or anything else are the way they are just because the knife happened to cut it up that way. It is important to concentrate on the knife itself. Later, I will want to show how an ability to use the knife creatively and effectively can result in solutions to the classic and romantic split. Phaedrus was a master with this knife, and used it with dexterity and a sense of power. With a single stroke of analytic thought, he split the whole world into parts of his own choosing. Split the parts and split the fragments of the parts, finer and finer and finer, until he had reduced it to what he wanted it to be. Even the special use of the terms quote unquote classic and quote unquote romantic are examples of his knifemanship. But if this were all there were to him, analytic skill, I would be more than willing to shut up about him. What makes it important not to shut up about him was that he used the skill in such a bizarre and yet meaningful way. No one ever saw this. I don't think he even saw it himself, and it may be an illusion of my own, but the knife he used was less that of an assassin. Okay. And it may be an illusion of my own, but the knife he used was less that of an assassin than that of a poor surgeon. Perhaps there is no difference, but he saw a sick and ailing thing happening, and he started cutting deeper and deeper to get at the root of it. He was after something. That is important. He was after something, and he used the knife because that was the only tool he had. But he took on so much and went so far in the end, his real victim was himself. Chapter 7. Heat is everywhere now. I can't ignore it anymore. The air is like a furnace blast, so hot that my eyes under the goggles feel cool compared to the rest of my face. Oh, dang. My hands are cool, but the gloves have big black spots from perspiration on the back, surrounded by white streaks of dried salt. Good Lord. On the road ahead, a crow tugs on some carrion and flies up slowly as we approach. It looks like a lizard on the road, dry and stuck to the tar. On the horizon appears an image of buildings shimmering slightly. I look down at the map and figure it must be Bowman. I think about ice water and air conditioning. On the street and sidewalks of Bowman, we see almost no one, even though plenty of parked cars show that they're here. Show they're here. All inside. We swing the machines into an angled parking place with a tight turn that points them outward for when we're ready to go. Alone, a lone, like somebody by themselves, elderly person wearing a broad-brimmed hat watches us put the cycles on their stands and remove helmets and goggles. Hot enough for you? He asks. His expression is blank. John shakes his head and says, God! G-A-W-D, exclamation point. The expression shaded by the hat becomes almost a smile. What is the temperature? John asks. 102, he says. Last I saw, should go to 104. Good Lord. He asks us how far we have come, and we tell him, and he nods with a kind of approval. That's a long way, he says. Then he asks about the machines. The beer and air conditioner are calling, but we don't break away. We just stand there in the 102 sun talking to this person. He is a stockman, retired. Says this is pretty much ranch country around here, and he used to own a Henderson cycle years ago. It pleases me that he should want to talk about his Henderson in this 102 sun. We talk about it for a while, with growing impatience from John and Sylvia and Chris, and when we finally say goodbye, he says he is glad to have met us, and his expression is still blank, but we sense that he really meant it. He walks away with a kind of slow dignity in the 102 sun. In the restaurant, I try to comment on this, but no one is interested. John and Sylvia look really out of it. They just sit and soak up the air-conditioned air without a move. The waitress comes for the order, and that snaps them out of it a little. But they are not ready, and so she goes away again. I don't think I want to leave here, Sylvia says. An image of the elderly man outside in the wide-brimmed hat comes back to me. Think what it was like around here before air conditioning, I say. I am, she says. With the roads this hot and that bad back tire of mine, we shouldn't go more than 60, I say. No comment from them. Chris, in contrast to them, seems to be back to his normal self, alert and watching everything. When the food comes, he wolfs it down, and then before we are half finished, asks for more. He gets it, and we wait for him to finish. Miles later, and the heat is just ferocious. Sunglasses and goggles are not enough for this glare. You need a welder's mask. I bet. The high plains break up into washed out and gullied hills. It is all bright whitish tan, not a blade of grass anywhere, just scattered weed stalks and rocks and sand. The black of the highway is a relief to look at. So I stare down at it and study how the blur whizzes by underfoot. Beside it, I see the left exhaust pipe has picked up a bluer color than it has ever before. I spit on my glove tips, touch it, and can see the sizzle. Not good. It's important now to just live with this and not fight it mentally. Mind control. I should talk now about Phaedrus's knife. It'll help understand some of the things we've talked about. The application of this knife, the division of the world into parts, and the building of the structure is something everybody does. All the time, we are aware of millions of things around us. These changing shapes, these burning hills, the sound of the engine, the feel of the throttle, each rock and weed and fence post and piece of debris beside the road. Aware of these things, but not really conscious of them unless there is something unusual or unless they reflect something we are predisposed to see. We could not possibly be conscious of these things and remember all of them because our mind would be so full of useless details we would be unable to think. From all this awareness, we must select, and what we select and call consciousness is never the same as the awareness because the process of selection mutates it. We take a handful of sand from the endless landscape of awareness around us and call that handful of sand the world. Once we have the handful of sand, the world of which we are conscious, a process of discrimination goes to work on it. This is the knife. We divide the sand into parts, this and that, here and there, black and white, now and then. The discrimination and the division of the conscious universe into parts. The handful of sand looks uniform at first, but the longer we look at it, the more diverse we find it to be. Each grain of sand is different. No two are alike. Some are similar in one way, some are similar in another way, and we can form the sand into separate piles on the basis of the similarity and dissimilarity. Shades of color in different piles, sizes in different piles, grain shapes in different piles, subtypes of grain shapes in different piles, grades of opacity in different piles, and so on and on and on. You'd think the process of subdivision and classification would come to an end somewhere, but it doesn't. It just goes on and on. Classical understanding is concerned with the piles and the basis for sorting and interrelating them. Romantic understanding is directed toward the handful of sand before the sorting begins. Both are valid ways of looking at the world, although irreconcilable with each other. What has become an urgent necessity is a way of looking at the world that does violence to neither of these two kinds of understanding and unites them into one. Such an understanding will not reject sand sorting or contemplation of unsorted sand for its own sake. Such an understanding will instead seek to direct attention to the endless landscape from which the sand is taken. That is what Phaedrus, the poor surgeon, was trying to do. To understand what he was trying to do, it's necessary to see that part of the landscape inseparable from it, which must be understood as a figure in the middle of it, sorting sand into piles. To see the landscape without seeing this figure is not to see the landscape at all. To reject that part of the Buddha that attends to the analysis of motorcycles is to miss the Buddha entirely. There is a perennial classical question that asks which part of the motorcycle, which grain of sand, and which pile is the Buddha. Obviously, to ask that question is to look in the wrong direction, for the Buddha is everywhere. But just as obviously to ask that question is to look in the right direction, for the Buddha is everywhere. Creator is everywhere. If you notice, it's like the same theme, right? About the Buddha that exists independently of any analytic thought, much has been said. Some would say too much and would question any attempt to add to it. But about the Buddha that exists within analytic thought and gives that analytic thought its direction, virtually nothing has been said, and there are historic reasons for this. But history keeps happening, and it seems no harm and maybe some positive good to add to our historical heritage with some talk in this area of discourse. When analytic thought, the knife is applied to experience, something is always killed in the process. That is fairly well understood, at least in the arts. Mark Twain's experience comes to mind, in which after he had mastered the analytic knowledge needed to pilot the Mississippi River, he discovered the river had lost its beauty. Something is always killed. But what is less noticed in the arts, something is always created too. And instead of just dwelling on what is killed, it's important to also see what's created and to see the process as a kind of death-birth continuity that is neither good nor bad, but just is. We pass through a town called Marmarth, M-A-R-M-A-R-T-H, but John doesn't stop even for a rest, and so we go on. More furnace heat into some badlands, and we cross the border into Montana. A sign by the road announces it. Sylvia waves her arms up and down, and I beep the horn in response, but when I look at the sign, my feelings are not jubilant at all. For me, its information causes a sudden inward tension that can't exist for them. They've no way of knowing we're now in the country where he lived. All this talk so far about classic and romantic understanding must seem a strangely oblique way of describing him, but to get at Phaedrus, this oblique route is the only one to take. To describe his physical appearance or the statistics of his life would be to dwell on misleading superficialities, and to come at him directly would be to invite disaster. He was insane, and when you look directly at an insane man, all you see is a reflection of your own knowledge that he's insane, which is not to see him at all. To see him, you must see what he saw, and when you are trying to see the vision of an insane man, an oblique route is the only way to come at it. Otherwise, your own opinions block the way. Well, that's true. There is only one access to him that I can see as a passable, and we still have a way to go. We'll leave it there. Don't go hang, we love you, minute.